The palace of the alien empire was built with tall black towers that touched the clouds. Its walls were covered in glowing silver marks that shined at night, and strange creatures guarded every gate. For aliens, this was a place of pride, but for humans, it was a place of fear. Among the guards of the palace was a human named Ryan. He wore the same armor as the others, but everyone could see the difference. The aliens were taller, their skin covered in bright colors, their voices sharp and heavy. Ryan, in comparison, looked small and plain. He did not complain, but deep inside he knew the aliens never saw him as an equal. Ryan was not chosen, he was taken. Like many humans, he had been forced to serve after the Empire conquered distant human colonies. Still, he carried his duty with silent strength. Every day, he walked the cold halls, watched the glowing doors, and kept his hand firm on the metal spear. He was patient, disciplined, and never spoke more than necessary. At the heart of the palace sat the ruler of the empire, the alien Queen Vera. She was feared in every star system. Her crown was not gold but living crystals that pulsed like fire. Her voice could silence a hall full of commanders. To her people, she was a symbol of power and perfection. To humans, she was a shadow that covered their lives. One morning, as the palace prepared for the Queen's public walk, Ryan stood with the other guards near the main hall. The hall was wide, with glowing stones on the floor that changed color with each step. Hundreds of aliens lined the path, waiting for the Queen to appear. The Queen entered with her slow, confident steps. Her robe was long and bright, moving like liquid light. Every alien bowed their head low, but Ryan, like other human guards, only placed his spear upright. He followed the strict rule given to him, never looked directly into the Queen's eyes. But fate works in small ways. As the Queen passed, one of the alien servants dropped a shining plate onto the glowing floor. The sound was sharp. All the guards turned for a second, even Ryan. His eyes, without thought, lifted toward the Queen. For only a breath of time, their eyes met. It was nothing, just a quick mistake. But for the Queen, it was enough. The hall froze. The Queen's steps stopped. Her crown glowed brighter. She turned to Ryan slowly, her eyes like burning suns. "Human," she said in a voice that echoed across the hall. "You dared to look at me without permission." Every alien in the hall lowered their gaze, waiting for punishment to fall. Ryan's grip tightened on his spear, but he did not speak. He knew there was no excuse that would save him. The Queen stepped closer. Her tall figure stood above him, her robe brushing against the glowing floor. "You forget your place," she said coldly. "You are nothing but a servant in this hall." Then, with a wave of her hand, she gave her judgment. Ryan was ordered to kneel in front of all the aliens. His armor was struck off his shoulder by the Queen's guard. The act was quick, but the meaning was sharp. It was humiliation, not death. She wanted to show that a human could be broken without a fight. The aliens whispered among themselves, some smiling at the scene. For them, it was entertainment. But Ryan did not shout, did not cry, did not beg. He only lowered his head and stayed silent. The Queen's eyes narrowed. She had expected fear or anger, but she saw neither. Instead, Ryan's silence carried something strange, calm, steady, almost like quiet pride. The Queen turned away, her robe flashing like fire. "Let this be a lesson," she said to the hall. "No human will forget who rules this empire." The crowd bowed, the moment passed, and the Queen left with her guards. The sound of her steps slowly faded in the glowing hall. Ryan stood again, his shoulders sore, his honor wounded, but his spirit unbroken. He returned to his post without a word. His eyes were steady, his back straight. To others, it seemed as if nothing had happened, but inside, a storm had begun to rise. That night, as the palace lights dimmed and the towers glowed under the stars, Queen Vera sat alone in her chamber. The memory of the human's eyes returned to her again and again. She had punished him, she had humiliated him, yet his silence did not look like defeat. She whispered to herself, though no one was there to hear, "Why did he not fear me?" And for the first time in many years, the queen felt a shadow of unease inside her heart. The days after the public punishment were heavy for Ryan. His shoulders still ached from the strike, but the pain of the body was nothing compared to the pain of humiliation. In the grand hall, every alien had seen him kneel. Every alien had seen his armor broken. And every alien had heard the queen's cold words that marked him as lesser. When Ryan walked through the palace corridors, whispers followed him. The alien guards laughed behind his back. Some mocked his silence, calling him a weak human who did not even protest. Others spat near his boots, saying he should be grateful that the queen allowed him to live. Ryan heard every word, but he answered none. He kept his eyes forward, his hands tight on his spear. He told himself again and again, a guard must stand. A guard must endure. Even when he returned to the human quarters, the shame did not leave him. His fellow humans looked at him with quiet sympathy. They did not laugh, but their silence carried its own weight. Ryan knew what they thought. He had been shamed in front of the Empire, and yet he had bowed without resistance. But in his heart, Ryan held a secret flame. He did not kneel because he was broken, he knelt because he chose not to waste his spirit on pride when survival demanded patience. While Ryan carried his silent struggle, the alien Queen Vero lived in her palace chambers, surrounded by shining walls and endless servants. Outwardly, she had forgotten the incident. She moved through meetings with commanders, judged reports from distant colonies, and prepared new orders for her fleets. Her words were strong, her face calm, and no one doubted her power. Yet when the halls grew quiet and the stars filled the night sky, she found herself remembering the human guard's eyes. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something else, something that made her uneasy. She tried to explain it to herself. Perhaps it was simply human stubbornness. Perhaps it was ignorance, the refusal to understand their place. Yet deep inside, she knew it was not that simple. For many nights, she thought about it. Why did that single human silence disturb her more than the screams of thousands of enemies? Why did his calm presence stay in her memory, when even her own commanders often faded from her mind? The queen tried to shake it off, but the thought returned like a shadow that refused to leave. One evening, when the sky above the palace was glowing with 3 moons, an alien commander named Sthur entered the queen's chamber. He bowed and said, "My queen, we have reports from the border. Strange enemy ships have appeared. They do not fight like the old rebels. They strike quickly, vanish, and leave our fleets confused." The queen's face remained calm. "Send stronger forces. Crush them before they spread." "As you command," Sthur replied. But in his voice there was unease. The queen noticed it. "Speak freely," she said. Sthur lowered his eyes. "The truth is, my queen, our defenses are not holding as they once did. The new enemy seems to know our weak points. They strike at our supplies, not our armies. They know where to cut so that we bleed slowly." The queen's crown glowed faintly as she thought. "Then we will adapt. We always do." Sthur bowed again and left. But the queen sat in silence for a long time after. Something about this new threat stirred the unease already growing in her heart. The next day, in the lower barracks, Ryan overheard 2 alien soldiers speaking about the same reports. They laughed nervously, saying the Empire would crush the enemy soon. But their laughter was thin. Ryan listened carefully. The details reminded him of old human wars, when small groups had fought greater empires with clever tactics. He remembered the stories of his ancestors, who had survived by striking where enemies were blind. He thought, the Empire does not understand this kind of war. But humans do. Ryan wanted to speak, but he knew his place. No alien would listen. To them, a human was only a servant. Still, he could not stop the thought forming in his mind, the Empire was not as unshakable as it believed. That night, as the guards marched through the palace halls, the Queen's eyes once again found Ryan. It was only for a moment, as he stood at his post, his figure still and silent. She remembered the humiliation she had given him. She remembered his eyes, steady even when he knelt. And she thought of the new enemy, striking silently, refusing to fight the way her empire expected. For the first time, the Queen wondered if the humans, the quiet servants she had always dismissed, carried some hidden strength she had never cared to see. Her chest tightened with something she did not want to name. Was it doubt? Was it regret? She turned away, telling herself it was nothing. But deep inside, she knew the truth, the shadow of the human guard's silence was growing larger in her mind. And soon, it would no longer be something she could ignore. The palace of the alien empire stood tall as always, but whispers of unease were spreading through its halls. Reports came from distant star systems, enemy ships were attacking supply lines, vanishing before fleets could catch them. The empire was vast, but for the first time in years, cracks began to show. The alien commanders dismissed the danger. They believed their fleets were strong enough to crush any foe. But the smaller soldiers and workers had begun to worry. Something about this enemy felt different. In the lower barracks, Ryan listened carefully whenever soldiers spoke about the attacks. He was only a guard, and humans were not allowed in the war councils. Still, soldiers often talked freely in the halls, thinking a human would not understand. Ryan understood more than they knew. The enemy was not fighting with size or strength. They struck where it hurt most: food routes, fuel lines, hidden outposts. Ryan thought of the old human stories told by his father when he was young. Those stories spoke of humans who fought against stronger forces, not by meeting them head-on, but by striking from the shadows. It was the same kind of war. Ryan kept these thoughts to himself. He knew no alien commander would listen to a human's advice. But when he looked at the Empire's proud soldiers, he felt a quiet certainty, they did not understand this kind of enemy. One evening, the palace walls shook with alarm. A small group of enemy raiders had reached the very edge of the capital system. Though quickly driven away, their attack left damage to the outposts around the planet. The news spread fast. Many guards were unsettled, whispering that the enemy was growing bold. That night, Ryan was assigned to watch near the supply gates of the palace. He stood silently with his spear, his eyes sharp. He noticed strange movements: workers carrying fuel crates in a careless way, guards talking instead of watching. In their overconfidence, they left small gaps in security. Ryan frowned. He knew that if the enemy dared to strike here, these small mistakes could become disasters. He wanted to warn someone, but his words would only bring laughter. Humans were not meant to give advice, they were meant to obey. So, he stayed silent. But he remembered every detail, every weakness, keeping it inside his mind. Far above, in her tall chamber, Queen Vera sat alone. Her commanders had assured her the enemy was under control, but her unease was growing. She remembered the look of the human guard she had punished, calm and steady even in humiliation. Against her own pride, she found herself thinking, if humans have survived so many defeats, perhaps they understand things we do not. She shook her head, refusing the thought. She was queen, ruler of countless worlds. What could a single human guard know that her fleets did not? And yet, the thought would not leave her. A week later, the enemy returned. This time, they struck at the palace's outer district, where fuel depots burned bright. The alien guards rushed to defend, but chaos spread quickly. Explosions shook the air. The palace trembled. Ryan was on duty at the supply gates when the attack came. A blast threw alien soldiers to the ground. Fire lit the sky. The enemy was fast, slipping through gaps like water through cracks. The alien guards shouted orders, but their lines were breaking. Some panicked, some ran, others fought blindly without order. Ryan's heart pounded, but his mind stayed calm. He remembered the old human stories. He saw where the enemy would strike next. He acted on instinct. "Block that corridor," he shouted to the nearest group of guards. They stared at him in shock. A human giving orders. But the enemy was already rushing forward. Ryan grabbed two fallen shields and placed them to block the path. The guards, desperate, copied him. The corridor held. Ryan then led a small group to protect the fuel crates. He used simple tricks, spreading guards in hidden corners, setting traps with loose metal, forcing the enemy to slow down. The aliens were confused, but the humans moved quickly, following Ryan's signals. For the first time, alien and human fought side by side with purpose. The battle ended after heavy damage. The enemy vanished as suddenly as they had come, leaving smoke and ruin behind. The palace still stood, but the cost was clear: many guards were dead, and supplies were destroyed. In the middle of the wreckage, Ryan stood tall, his armor dirty, his hands burned, but his eyes sharp. Some aliens looked at him with surprise. They had seen his orders save lives, though none dared speak it aloud. Later that night, in her high chamber, Queen Vera heard the reports. At first, the commanders dismissed the humans' actions as luck. But as more details came, the truth could not be hidden: the palace had been saved in part by the human guards' quick thinking. The queen sat in silence. She remembered the day she had humiliated him in front of all. Now, that same human had saved her palace. She looked out at the stars beyond her window. For the first time in many years, she felt something heavy in her chest: not anger, not pride, but doubt. She whispered, as if speaking to herself, "Perhaps there is more to humans than I believed." But even as she spoke, she pushed the thought away. For a queen, to admit she had been wrong was harder than any battle. Still, the truth had begun to show itself. And no matter how she tried, she could not ignore it forever. The palace was being repaired after the sudden attack. Smoke still hung in the air, and the shining walls were marked with black burns. Workers hurried day and night to rebuild, but the fear in their eyes could not be repaired so easily. Everyone knew now the empire was not untouchable. The alien commanders promised the queen that stronger defenses would stop the enemy next time. They filled the halls with new guards, new weapons, and loud speeches of strength. Yet even as they spoke, whispers of doubt grew in the lower ranks. Ryan, the human guard, went back to his duty as if nothing had changed. He stood with his spear, watched the gates, and walked the cold halls with steady steps. But those who had seen his quick actions during the raid looked at him differently now. They did not mock him as much. Some even lowered their voices when he passed. Ryan did not seek praise. He carried his duty in silence, as always. But inside, his thoughts grew sharper. He had seen the empire bleed, and he knew it could bleed again. One evening, as the twin suns were sinking behind the palace towers, the alarm bells rang once more. The enemy had returned. This time, they came not for the outer depots but for the palace itself. Explosions shook the air as black ships descended from the clouds, releasing raiders into the streets. The city below the palace was in chaos. Fire spread, and civilians ran for cover. Inside the palace, the alien commanders rushed to protect the queen. Guards formed lines, shields raised, weapons ready. The grand hall filled with tension, glowing stones beneath their feet flashing red in warning. Queen Vera stood tall, her crown of living crystals burning bright. Her face showed no fear, only cold authority. Yet in her heart, unease grew stronger. She had felt it since the last raid that this enemy was not one she could dismiss. Ryan stood among the guards near the queen's path. His eyes scanned the hall, every shadow, every door. He felt something the others did not: the enemy would not attack the front. They would come from somewhere unexpected. The sound of battle outside grew louder. Shouts, crashes, the hum of alien weapons. Suddenly, the side wall of the hall burst open in a storm of fire and smoke. Enemy raiders stormed inside, faster than the guards could react. The alien lines broke. Many guards fell back in confusion. The raiders moved with sharp precision, heading straight for the queen. For a moment, even Queen Vera froze. The chaos was too sudden. Her commanders shouted orders, but the enemy was already inside the hall. Ryan did not wait. He leaped forward, spear raised, his body moving before his mind had time to think. He struck the first raider, driving him back, then pulled a fallen shield to block the queen's side. "Move behind the pillars," Ryan shouted. His voice carried not as a servant's, but as a soldier's. The queen stared at him in shock. A human giving her orders. Yet in that moment of danger, she obeyed. She stepped back as Ryan and a few desperate guards formed a shield wall in front of her. The raiders struck hard. Blades and fire clashed against shields. Guards screamed. Ryan's arms shook from the force, but he held his ground. His eyes were sharp, his voice steady. "Left side, close the gap," he called. The alien guards, too shaken to think, followed his command. The line held. One raider broke through, leaping over the shields. He landed only a few steps away from the queen, his weapon raised high. The queen's eyes widened. For a breath of time, death stood before her. But Ryan was faster. He threw aside his shield and lunged, tackling the raider before the blade could fall. The two rolled across the floor. The enemy's weapon clashed against Ryan's armor, cutting through the metal. Pain shot through his side, but he forced his spear upward and struck. The raider fell still. Ryan stood again, blood on his armor, his spear shaking in his hand. He turned to the queen, breathing heavy but steady. "Stay back," he said, his voice low but firm. The queen looked at him, and for the first time in her long reign, she felt something she had never felt toward a human: dependence. The battle lasted longer, but slowly the enemy was pushed back. Reinforcements arrived, driving the raiders from the hall. The palace walls shook with victory cries, though the ground was stained with the fallen. When silence finally returned, Queen Vera stood among the broken stones, her robe torn, her crown dimmed. She looked at the guards who remained and at Ryan, who still stood upright despite his wounds. Her chest tightened. The very human she had shamed in front of all had just saved her life. Without him, she would be nothing more than a fallen queen among ruins. Later that night, the palace was quiet. The fires were out, the halls empty. Queen Vera sat alone in her chamber, the memory of the battle still sharp in her mind. Again and again she saw it: the human guard throwing himself in front of her, the calm fire in his eyes, the strength in his silence. She whispered to herself, the words heavy and strange on her tongue, "I live, because of him." And for the first time in many years, the queen's pride felt weak. A shadow of realization entered her heart. Perhaps she had been wrong about humans. Perhaps the truth she had ignored was standing right before her all along. The palace had survived another attack, but its shining walls no longer looked the same. Deep cracks marked the stones, smoke stains clung to the ceilings, and the air still carried the bitter smell of fire. For the alien empire, it was a wound not only of stone but of pride. Inside her chamber, Queen Vera sat in silence. She was alive, but her mind was restless. She could not forget the battle, the raiders charging forward, the moment death stood before her. And above all, she could not forget the human guard, Ryan, who had saved her life with his own blood. The memory of their first meeting returned: the day she had humiliated him in front of the whole hall. Back then, She had thought him weak, a small creature unworthy of her gaze. But in the battle, she had seen another truth. His silence was not weakness, it was strength. His patience was not fear, it was control. The queen could not ignore it anymore. She needed to know. Ryan was summoned to her private chamber. He came with slow, steady steps, his armor still scratched, his wounds wrapped in simple cloth. He stood tall before her throne, holding his spear with calm dignity. For a long moment, the queen said nothing. She only studied him. The guard she once forced to kneel now looked unbroken even after facing death. Finally, she spoke. "You saved me." Ryan bowed his head slightly. "I did my duty." Her crown flickered faintly. "Your duty is to guard, not to command. Yet in battle, you gave orders. My soldiers obeyed you. Why?" Ryan's eyes were steady. "Because someone had to. If no one acted, the enemy would have reached you." The queen's fingers tightened on her throne. His words were calm, without pride or fear. She leaned forward. "Tell me, human. Why did you save me? After I shamed you before all, after I broke your honor, why did you not turn away and let the enemy's blade fall?" The hall grew quiet. Even the walls seemed to wait for his answer. Ryan lifted his head. His voice was low but strong. "Because loyalty does not depend on how I am treated. It depends on who I choose to be. You are my queen. My life is given to protect yours. That is my duty, and my choice." The queen's chest tightened. She had ruled for years through fear and pride, believing loyalty came from power. But this human spoke of a different kind of loyalty, one that could not be broken by humiliation. The queen stood slowly and stepped down from her throne. She looked into his eyes, searching. "What is it in humans that gives you this strength? You are weaker than us. Smaller. Yet in your eyes, I see something greater than fear. What is it?" Ryan was silent for a moment. Then he answered, "It is history." "History?" "Yes," he said. "Humans have lived under the shadow of stronger powers for as long as we can remember. On our world, nature was stronger than us: storms, beasts, fire, hunger. Later, empires rose above us, crushing our colonies. We survived not because we were strongest, but because we refused to break. We learned to endure, to fight when we must, and to wait when we could not win. We learned to protect each other, even when it seemed useless. That is what kept us alive." The queen listened in silence. His words cut deep into her thoughts. She had seen humans as fragile, yet here stood proof that their true strength was invisible. Ryan continued, his voice steady. "You call us weak because we bend. But bending is not the same as breaking. A tree that never bends will snap in the storm. A tree that bends will rise again after the wind is gone. That is humanity. That is why we still remain." The chamber was quiet. The queen's crown glowed faintly, as if it too listened to his words. For the first time in her reign, Queen Vera felt shame in her heart. Shame not only for humiliating him, but for blinding herself to the truth for so long. She lowered her eyes slightly, something she had never done before. "Perhaps, we have misjudged you. Perhaps I have misjudged you." Ryan bowed. "I did not come to prove myself. I only came to serve." But in those words, the queen heard more than humility. She heard the silent pride of a people who had endured what no empire could erase. Later that night, the queen stood at her high balcony, staring at the stars. For years, she had seen them as jewels of her empire, shining under her rule. But now she wondered, how many of those stars carried stories she had ignored? How many humans had suffered silently under her crown, holding strength she never cared to see? Her chest felt heavy. The memory of Ryan kneeling before her in humiliation burned in her mind, but now it was joined by the memory of him standing before death, unbroken. She whispered to the night, "What have I done?" The stars gave no answer. But deep inside her heart, the queen knew, the truth of humanity had revealed itself, and she could never see them as weak again. The palace shined again after many repairs, but the glow no longer felt like true strength. Beneath the crystal towers, fear still lingered. The enemy had not been defeated, they had only withdrawn to strike again later. Everyone in the empire knew it. Inside her throne chamber, Queen Vero listened to her commanders. They spoke of building bigger fleets, of striking harder, of showing their power. Their voices were full of pride, but their eyes betrayed unease. They had no clear plan. The queen remained silent through their speeches. Her thoughts were not on their words but on the human guard, Ryan. Again and again she remembered his calm voice, his quick decisions in battle, his story about human survival. She remembered his strength was not in size, but in loyalty, patience, and wisdom born from hardship. At last, she raised her hand. "Enough. Leave me." The commanders bowed and left the chamber, whispering among themselves. None dared question her directly, but their doubt grew. Why was the queen listening to silence instead of power? That evening, the queen called for Ryan again. He came quietly, wearing the same worn armor, his spear steady in his hand. "You told me," the queen said slowly, "that humans survived because they learned to bend but not break. Do you believe the Empire can survive this enemy the same way?" Ryan studied her. For the first time, she was not speaking as a ruler above him, but almost as an equal seeking truth. He answered carefully. "The Empire has strength," he said. "But it believes strength alone is enough. The enemy does not fight against strength. They fight against weakness. They search for cracks, for gaps, for mistakes. If the Empire keeps showing its pride, the enemy will keep striking where it does not look." The queen lowered her eyes. His words were sharp because they were true. Her empire had been blind, and her pride had helped keep that blindness. "What should be done?" she asked. Ryan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Listen. Watch. Change. Do not fight where the enemy is strongest. Make them strike into traps. Do not protect only with force, protect with thought." The queen's chest grew heavy. The advice was simple, yet none of her proud commanders had spoken it. They were too blinded by their belief in power. And she, their queen, had been the same. She looked at Ryan, and the weight of her regret deepened. How many humans had carried such wisdom while she ignored them? How many times had she silenced voices that could have helped her empire survive? The next day, the queen shocked her court. She announced that new defense plans would be tested, guided by the observations of the human guard. The alien commanders frowned, their pride wounded. But none dared to speak against her directly. Under Ryan's quiet guidance, changes were made. Supply routes were hidden instead of flaunted. Fake convoys were sent to draw the enemy into ambushes. Guards were taught to fight in smaller groups, not just in large proud formations. At first, many aliens resisted the changes. They muttered that it was beneath their honor to hide, to trick, to bend. But when the next enemy attack came, the results were clear. The raiders struck a convoy only to find it was a trap. Hidden forces surrounded them, and for the first time, the Empire won a clean victory. The palace cheered, though many did not know the true source of the plan. The queen knew. And her heart was torn between relief and regret. One night, after the victory, Queen Vera stood on her high balcony, the stars shining cold above her. Ryan stood a few steps behind, silent as always. "You saved the Empire again," she said softly. Ryan bowed his head. "It was not me. It was only what anyone could see, if they looked closely." The queen turned to him, her voice heavy. "No, Ryan. It was you. And she stopped, her pride holding the words in her throat. For a long time she had commanded with strength, never admitting weakness. But now, the weight of her actions pressed too heavily. I wronged you, she said finally. Her voice was low, almost broken. I shamed you before my people. I treated you as less than dust, while your strength was greater than my own. That truth will follow me all my life. Ryan looked at her calmly. His eyes showed no anger, no pride, only steady silence. I chose my path, he said simply. I chose to serve, even when dishonored. That is what it means to be human. The queen's chest tightened. His words did not release her from regret, they deepened it. For she knew now that nothing she gave him, honor, rank, or praise, could erase the wound she had placed on his dignity. From that day forward, the queen listened more carefully. She gave Ryan's quiet advice greater weight than the loud voices of her commanders. And each victory they won together only sharpened her regret. For every triumph the empire gained, a shadow followed the queen's heart, the memory of how she had once crushed the honor of the very man who had saved her life and her throne. And she knew this truth: no victory, no glory, no empire could ever undo that single mistake. The alien empire had survived. The enemy, once so bold and clever, had finally retreated beyond the farthest stars. The palace, though scarred by fire and battle, still stood tall. Its towers reflected the three moons, casting long shadows over the city below. Inside the palace, Queen Vera walked quietly through the halls. The celebrations of victory were loud outside, but inside, she felt only a heavy silence. Her heart was full not with pride, but with a deep, unshakable regret. At her side, Ryan moved steadily, silent as always. The human guard who had once knelt in humiliation now stood as the savior of the empire. He had guided strategies, led defenses, and saved countless lives. Yet no one outside her chamber knew the full truth of his deeds. The queen stopped at the balcony overlooking the city. Fires had been put out, and the streets were quiet except for distant cheers. She gazed at the stars above, remembering the many times she had dismissed humans as weak, small, and unimportant. She whispered, almost to herself, "How blind I was." Ryan remained silent, understanding her words without needing to speak. His calm presence reminded her of every lesson she had learned too late: strength is not always visible, loyalty is not bought by fear, and courage can appear even in the smallest of beings. That evening, the queen held a private audience with her surviving commanders. She instructed them to rebuild the empire not just with power, but with wisdom. Supply lines were to be carefully guarded, fleets organized with human-like precision, and tactics designed for patience and observation, not only brute strength. When she spoke of these plans, the commanders looked shocked. Some whispered, questioning her new trust in a human guard. But she ignored their doubts. In her heart, she knew the truth that could no longer be denied: Ryan had changed the fate of the empire, and she could not undo what he had done. Later, in the quiet of the palace, the queen approached Ryan. He stood near the central hall, cleaning his spear, his armor still scarred from battles past. "Ryan," she said softly, "the empire lives because of you. I cannot erase what I did to you before. I cannot undo the shame I caused. But I can give you respect, and honor beyond what anyone has offered." Ryan lowered his head slightly. "I do not seek reward, my queen. I only serve." Her chest tightened. She could not speak the full weight of her regret: the years of pride, the humiliation, the blindness to his worth. She only nodded, letting silence carry the words that could not be spoken. The next day, the queen stood before her people. Her voice echoed across the palace square. She praised the defenders of the empire, highlighting the courage and skill of every soldier, human and alien alike. But she did not single out Ryan in front of everyone. She knew some honors could never erase what had been done. Some truths were meant only for the heart. Ryan watched silently from the side. He did not need recognition. His satisfaction came from seeing the empire survive, the people safe, and the queen finally understanding a truth he had always known, that humans were more than their size, more than their weakness, more than anyone could have imagined. In the quiet moments, the queen thought about what had passed. She had ruled with power, with fear, and with pride, but Ryan had shown her that strength could also be quiet, unseen, and patient. The lesson weighed on her like a shadow, she had been too slow to see it, and that delay had cost her pride, and nearly her empire. She carried the regret in her heart, a reminder that even rulers could be wrong, and that wisdom sometimes comes from those we least expect. Weeks later, the palace resumed its normal life. Towers gleamed, walls were repaired, and the empire appeared stronger than ever. Yet in her private chambers, Queen Vera could not forget the small human who had taught her so much. She remembered every glance, every calm order, every act of courage. Humans, she whispered, their strength lies not in what I can take from them, but in what they carry within themselves. Ryan heard her words, though he did not respond. He understood her meaning, and he understood her regret. The empire had survived. The enemy had gone. Victory was theirs. Yet the queen would never forget what she had done to the one human who had proven the greatest strength of all. And so, though the empire flourished, Queen Vera carried her forever regret, a quiet reminder of humility, wisdom, and the power of a human's heart. For in the end, humans had shown that true strength is not in fear, not in size, not in power, but in loyalty, courage, and quiet resilience. And that truth would remain, unbroken, forever.